it is located in the in-between with a hyphen versus caught in the pendulum of the between.
I want you to, if you don't mind, say a little bit more about the in-between, if you don't mind. Like, could you flesh that out idea a
Absolutely,
little?
absolutely. So Desmond, Vervaeke and Guy Sinstock on Guy Sinstock's channel, we're just having a lovely chat on William Desmond's work, who is someone that Andrew Luber knows, he sat in classes with, and he talks a lot about the in-between, where I think the book in Luber, correct me if I'm wrong, is being and the in-between. So he's more interested in, say, you know, a lot of times people go being and nothing, or, you know, pure bit, whatever. But Desmond really wants to stress how humans are in between beings, right? And it's not that we're oscillating between, that we are a kind of betweenness, as I would put it. And Luber, please correct me in any way. And maybe I'll pass it to Luber and then give it to you, Christian, so he can elaborate a little better than me. Like as a human being, I'm thinking and here at the same time, right? I'm not just here, I'm also thinking, right? I'm not just my mind, but also my body. When I'm in a relation, there's a betweenness going on. So we're constantly in an in-between. And Desmond is also, by basing a metaphysics and philosophy on the in-between, it's kind of like what he's doing is placing thought on the precipice of theology without stepping into theology, but also acknowledging the horizon of the sacred, you could say. That is this kind of realization relevance, and Vervaeke was saying this in a different way, where the being is always open to something unfolding that surprises them, that is not reducible to the being, but requires them to be postured in a certain way to reality so they can be so surprised. And this is a kind of theological disposition without necessarily going into theology, and Mr. Lubert is positing that the best way to perhaps word what this is getting at is something like storytelling, and I agree. And I will note that I do think actually a lot of the best theology is actually like that. A lot of the Marion's super-saturated phenomenon, you could say Judaism not wanting to say the name of God, Christianity in the flesh, in the body, Jesus certainly, is Jesus doing theology a lot? It's really weird because Jesus doesn't sound like Aquinas, right? He doesn't really talk a lot of theology, and yet in a way is theology. Now, that doesn't mean theology is bad, but it does suggest that good theology is perhaps something like the in-between. More must be said, but let me give it to Mr. Luber.
It caught me that the printing press makes it sometimes hard to maintain a sense of in-betweenness, because we want to kind of like cement something, and then it's no longer alive, right? And I was thinking about this last night with the Bible, and how Jesus never said, and by the way, write down everything I said and put it into a book. Like, I don't think he said that anyways. I haven't come across that so far. And yet we do that, and technology does that. And is there a kind of technology, so to speak? And I guess, you know, an easy thing to point to would be something like a psychotechnology, a meditation practice, or whatever. But the question is, like, what is the printing press that allows for that engenders more in-betweenness? But that was just a stray thought, so you don't have to respond to it.
I mean, I have an
Unless
answer to
you'd like.
that. I'm extremely biased. Like my whole past 5 years has been surrounding the concept of
Eurythmy. For me, what you were saying on the printing press, exactly, that was Derrida's kind of idea, is that language has a way of creating the gap between signifier and signified that then orients us toward believing in being that we are separated from and trying to get to, and there's a gap. And he said basically all metaphysics based on the gap is out. And for him, that meant all metaphysics because it was a metaphysics of presence, how to make being present. My critique of Derrida is that not all metaphysics are metaphysics of the book. There are metaphysics of the act of reading itself. In the act of reading, there's an apprehension. And so metaphysics of apprehension, metaphysics of becoming, metaphysics that are actually movement, we could say, are not out, even if Derrida, bagel metaphysics, there you go. Also, what I would say, now William Ong notes that before the printing press, we basically couldn't think the scientific treatise because we offload thought to the book. That frees up creative possibility. And as Samuel Lunkar puts it, the printing press makes memory more flexible. Therefore, humans became more creative. But here's the irony. the very and Dietrich McCloskey, many people, Marshall McLuhan, blah blah blah. We'll talk about the printing press making us more creative, but there's an irony, whereas in the very act of making human beings more creative, we also created the book that trained us to associate most authoritative knowledge with the stagnant. So our creative potential, in its unleashing, also created the mechanism that would create the habit of it not using that creative potential. And for us actually then looking for systems of thought that would do our thinking for us, because you get a certain solidity to thought in the book that then hides from us the capacity that the book has given us. And I think we're basically at the age of that realization. And that's where I do have hope, because we have not seen a humanity that has gained the benefits of the book without falling to the temptation of the book not to use those benefits. And that's, I think I would say, the printing press of, well, I'm biased, but the printing press of this new human cognition, in-betweenness, et cetera, so forth, is eurythmy, is the liminal web. You are, as you're doing this conversation, you are recording it, this social coordination mechanism online, as we've talked about many times before. It is the ability to create a recorded process while forgetting you're doing a recorded process. Thus, it does not interfere via self-awareness on the dialogos. Thus, it can provide a model that can send a signal for people how to do it. And it also shows people a mode of being, not merely the information that tends to be what a book records. A book cannot show you the act of writing it, right? The book cannot show you the mode of which generated the book. But the mode of which generated the book is precisely the flexible mind that the book makes possible. That is precisely the primary thing that can be hidden by the secondary thing, that you need the secondary thing for the primary thing, and the secondary thing can point back to the primary thing, but only if you don't forget. Oh, and what did Plato teach us about writing? It makes us forgetful. So we need to not forget that of which we are now capable of, thanks to a mechanism that makes us forgetful. And so the more models we have, the more images that we can see, such as I think is being created on the liminal web, the higher the probability we might remember that of which we've forgotten all along, and then we'll be shocked once we remember it, like that servant in Menno.
It's amore.
But let me pass it back to Christian. Christian, please.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. I really enjoyed that. The idea of the liminal web as a printing press for in-betweenness brings me to an idea which I'm kind of putting out there just for fun. I'm, you know, it's something I'm hoping that one day I'll have the right kind of, I don't know. I'm waiting for the magic pieces to fall together and be like, ah, yes, now's the time to strike on this. But what I would love for there to be as a kind of liminal web project is basically an online centralized space for people to propose and find opportunities to meet with each other in Zoom chats, basically. And to do whatever the hell you want. And it's like, here's what I want to do. I want to have a 2-month-long weekly book club on this book. And here's kind of when I'm available. And people can browse through all of these proposed meetups and find ones that work for them. And wouldn't that be grand? You know, whether that's like a one-off, here I've got this weird theory that I want to talk about and want to get people's feedback, or I want to do a month-long accountability group, or I want to do something slightly more therapeutic, or whatever. Because it's like, I don't see that existing. Clubhouse was like kind of like that a little bit, except that you had to be very on Clubhouse all the time for that to work well. And it was either you were like kind of swimming in those waters or you weren't there at all. But to have like this thing where it's like, okay, no, there's like this more kind of static central place where at your leisure you can schedule a series or one-offs or whatever kinds of meetups where you get to do this thing of learning to relate with people, where you get to, and for a lot of people that's a very new thing. You know, for us, we're talky people, and we like the game of playing with the threads and seeing where the ball moves around. But for a lot of people, that's new territory, and those are new muscles to build. And I would love, and one thing I love about the Zoom format is that it allows people to explore that space within themselves, within their bodies, in a way that's limbic system as in person. And I can say this was true for me, and I had like experiences with online chats before I was introduced to the liminal web in some other contexts, and it was such a great opportunity for me to learn to what was like a titrated environment for me, where I got a lot of control about how involved I was. For instance, I can turn my camera off. If I need to, I can walk away from the computer and take some deep breaths. And the anxieties of you know that are very kind of like primal in us about survival and in-group out-group and all those kinds of things are quite dampened online, right? Because everything's being filtered and muted or like kind of minimized through this little computer screen, that if I need to, I could just turn it off and never see any of you guys again. So the stakes are much lower. And then, but of course, still, there's some exposure. And so my limbic system is getting triggered, and I am like feeling like, how vulnerable do I want to be? And how do I feel now that I've said that? And, oh man, I just ranted and rambled too much there, or did I? Or I don't know, or, oh, that person said I don't agree with, and it you know, having these online spaces for communication gave me a lot of opportunity for me to learn the skills of regulating my nervous system in conversation with other people, and that did not stay limited to online spaces. It gave me the ability to do that better in person. So it's kind of like a little bit of a training camp, like a you know, safe space, as they call it, a padded room, which really, really increased the capacities of what I was able to do in my life. Anyways, so that's I'm not claiming that it's the printing press of in-betweenness, but I would love for there to be that place for people to find opportunities to engage with each other in these kinds of online video settings.
Divine. That was absolutely magnificent. And I agree. I strongly agree that the liminal web, Zoom, Zoom tradition, I do think, there's the oral tradition, the written tradition. In a sense, this is the Zoom tradition. I've spoken with Jacob Kajier and Tim about that. I do think it provides training. I do also think a lot of the benefits that people are looking for, say in therapy, say training with a counselor, are actually afforded in Zoom conversations. I'm not saying all of it. I'm not saying there aren't unique benefits to that space, because you can drill down in particular traumas, et cetera, so forth. But conversational skill, I think it would be struggle to overstate how important conversational skill is. How many marriages end up in disaster because of a lack of conversational skill? Not hate. It ends up in hate because of a lack of conversational skill and misunderstanding. But what is the root of so many problems? That's good. Of so many problems that people have in their life? Well, Chekhov put it very well. He said, the problem with people of whom love one another is that they're constantly misunderstanding one another. And basically all of Chekhov's plays are based upon that premise. One can go through Chekhov and see over and over again a recapitulation of the reality that the more people love one another, the more likely they actually are to misunderstand one another. Oddly, you don't tend to misunderstand strangers. That's something Chekhov claimed, and he kind of laughed about. We don't really misunderstand strangers because we just move on. We don't really deeply tarry with what they said. If we don't understand what the stranger said, we just move on to the next thing. We had a conversation with them. In fact, with strangers, you tend to understand their intent. Their intent is they're trying to speak to me. Okay, great, yeah, and you move on. It's with loved ones that the meaning cares more to you, right? With strangers, you're not really listening for the meaning so much. It doesn't really bother you if you don't understand everything they're saying. There are not stakes, right? But with loved ones, you move to a relationship of communication where you're more so trying to get the meaning. And often, unfortunately, we find there isn't meaning, or there's a hidden narcissism, or the meaning is that we have no idea what we're doing, right? And so we find ourselves in conversation constantly misunderstanding one another because we've never been trained on how to communicate meaning, and we've never even determined our own meaning, or the own meaning of our own lives that we have from our own childhood traumas, that is narcissism or something like that. And so we find ourselves like two serpents locked. What did Chesterton say? You know, marriage is a duel to the death that no one of honor will turn down. And indeed, much of great literature is simply approaching from different angles. The great irony that the more we love people, the more we find ourselves misunderstanding them. But because we misunderstand them, that's why they can be an infinite source of mystery and beauty. Because if we could entirely understand them, then the book would be closed. Misunderstanding, as difficult as it might be, is precisely the prerequisite necessary for the in-betweenness by which we can approach a horizon that is not reducible to human instrumentation. So there are silver linings to these difficulties. I would also note, and then I'll pass it to Michael, I think we're in the age of dialogue technology. Zoom affords infinite innovation of dialogue technologies, where if you're honest, for most of history, the only dialogue technology we had was the debate. You had conversation and debate, and that was about it, right? I'm not saying that was literally it, but generally it was very limited. Well, now that we have this technology, one could imagine setting up many rules. And also the critical thing with that example, if you go into a conversation and just introduce that without everyone knowing those are the rules, they'll probably be upset. But if you have like 5 rooms, and here is Jonathan Rouse, Ralston has some dialogue structures, right? He has the anti-debate, I think he calls it, right? So room A is an anti-debate. Room B is what Christian described. And here are the rules. Select your room, right? Then people would know what they were getting on and thus have permission to engage in that way of conversation without causing offense or misunderstanding, right? I honestly do think we are now in the Zoom age, the oral tradition, the written tradition, the Zoom tradition. You certainly have. Who knows how many possible dialogue experimentation that set different rules for engagements that may unlock different ways of engagement that could afford who knows what. And look, I'm always struck when you look at society, because there's always this idea of, oh, come on, do we really want to put that much stake in conversation? Because there's also this idea of, can philosophy really make that big of a difference? Well, when you note that philosophy changes how you talk with people, so philosophy is a kind of quality of conversation. It's not just like meditating upon truth. It is that. But you could argue all conversation is getting at a truth. When people ask you what you did today, they want the facts of what you did today, right? Small talk is actually an attempt at a truth, right? So you could argue all conversation is at least circling some sort of truth. How are you feeling? Are you angry at me? What did you do today? Everyone is constantly trying to get at reality, even if they don't know they're doing that, right? And philosophy is simply a form of that. Well, the question is the following. Okay, so philosophy can make a big difference, blah, blah, blah. Conversation is primarily what it is. Does conversation really matter? How much of society is nothing more than the creation of spaces for people to talk? Is not every restaurant that? Is not the cell phone that? Is not school that? 90% of society is about creating spaces for conversation. Yeah, you have movie theaters, but guess what? Those are 2 hours, and then afterwards you go to a restaurant or something, right? Like everything, when people go on dates, what is the main thing you're doing at a date? Talking. If you're not, you're in trouble. So there's really something very important that if we link philosophy with the quality of conversation and simply look out on the world and say, how much of human civilization is about conversation? Oh, a whole lot of it. Then it becomes clear why experimentations in conversation and different qualities of conversation actually can make a huge difference. I mean, can you have a work site without conversation? My goodness. So That, I think, is something to be noted. It is extraordinary how much of society is simply the infrastructure by which people can talk with one another, all as we train them with AI to be incapable of speaking. I will also note to your point, Christian, very well put, on the dangers of the liminal. For me, if you identify with the liminal, then it falls into the signal. And funny enough, it becomes between, not in between, because we were speaking with that on Mr. Luba, right? If you say, I am the liminal, then it's no longer in between. It's actually ironically no longer liminal. It's become a stable state, right? And that's where you get all of the status games and different things. But this is why, for me personally, I like to emphasize Lacan, Hegel, subjective destitution, because, you know, a lot of people will talk about relational ontology, but notice the difference of the flavor when I use the word relation versus relationship. Ooh, let's go back to relations. Because relations have a certain depersonalization, a certain safeness to them. But when I talk about relationship, ooh, that's messy. I rather talk about relations, get the benefits of relationship without the negativity of upsetting someone. Not the fact that I didn't do the dishes and I was supposed to. I think there's a danger in liminal or relational ontologies. Not that I'm saying anyone necessarily falls into this. Only one can know their own heart. But there is a danger in identifying with relations at the expense of relationship. And the truth of relationship that we learn from literature, and I think many of the great thinkers like a Lacan or a Hegel, is that relationships are where you're surprised by your own, well, sin, by your own inability to be patient, by your own short-sightedness, by your own, oh, you thought you were so smart. You're not. Because no one intends, as my grandmother once said. She said, isn't it funny, no one gets married planning to get a divorce. That blew my mind, because then what in the world? Why do so many people get divorces, right? Because people underestimate themselves and their own struggles of dealing with a real human being. And one must be careful to talk about relations instead of relationships, because I think that can set one up for that unfortunate discovery. But let me pass it to Michael and then Jacob and Dimitri. Michael, it's good to have you, sir. And I love your background. It's beautiful.
Star behind me might be distracting to some people.
I think your head having a halo is
this
perfect. It's got a halo. It's perfect.
Yeah, great. I feel like if I overestimate myself a little bit, then I can block it. But no, this has been great. I'm really captivated by Christian's idea. I think what's being trained and cultivated in a group like this is the ability to, in an anti-debate sense, like really strongman other ideas and see how they converge with your own and see how they build on your own. And yeah, like, you know, picking up threads, stitching tapestries, things like this, that are very antithetical to how most of us communicate. You know, we communicate to straw man, to dunk on, to destroy, to poke fun at, to dismiss, whatever. This is a very different thing. But I think that structure, Christian's idea, is also not doing that. But what it's promoting is the free expression of ideas and the kind of building up of courage to really put forth something. You know, to really just kind of stick your neck out towards something that you want to share about, you know, instead of being like, oh my gosh, like, can I say that? Like, will they think I'm dumb? Like, is that worth saying? Like, is everyone just smarter than me? Like, all those things that, you know, we get absorbed with in conversation, like, that just seems to kind of wither away when you have this open forum where not only are you given the freedom to express yourself and to share, but 99.9% of the time it's received well, and people like it, you know, it helps people see things in a different way. It helps build on their thinking, like, and that just is a reinforcing structure of like, oh, the things that I think, like, I have the value to this space. Like, I meaning just everyone here. And like, how many of us walk around the world like not getting that on a regular basis, you know, like not getting that reinforcement of someone saying, oh yeah, that thing that you said, like it stuck with me all week, and like it's made me see this thing in a different way, like that I am actually changed as a result of being in relationship with you. And I think that's where, you know, you talk about relationships ending based on, you know, poor communication. I think there's a lot to that, but I think just what I've observed is like a large part of it is when two people believe that they fully know the other, like, and you know, you've talked about that before. It's just like, that's just like the death of a relationship, is when you've like thought you've got someone all figured out. And it's not just that, like, that's just like false, because we're all inexhaustible founts of, like, you know, creation and God, but it's just like what that does to the way you navigate the world is just, you start seeing people as objects, because you're like, oh, I figured you out. You're not changing anymore. You're this stone figure in my life.
I was also going to note, Christian asked about Jesus and writing down. I think this is very relevant here, because you just said correctly that when you fully know someone in a relationship, they die. Isn't that funny? Because don't you in a relationship want to fully know someone? And yet if you succeed in that undertaking, they're an object. So this is where, like Viveki and Guy were talking about with Desmond, they have to, you're knowing a person to the degree needed so that they can surprise you. If you don't know someone entirely, they can't surprise you. But if you know them too much, they can't surprise you. So you're trying to fight the right condition or grip, optimal grip perhaps, as Mr. Viveki would say, so that they can continue to surprise you, right? Well, so the best goes with thought, so the best goes with books, so the best goes with everything. The best of everything is something that you can hold in a manner that can't squash out its surprise. The best literature is that of which after you're done with, you still think about. Even though you finished The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, Caddy is still up in that tree, and you find yourself wondering about her, seeing as he didn't have a section in the book. Faulkner, in his great genius, understood this by having Caddy never having a section, even though she's kind of the main character. You have your Benji, you have your Quentin, you have your Jason, and you have your Dilsey, but they orbit the center. That is not located because Faulkner knew any center that was made present would be one that could not hold, as Yeats said, and then things would fall apart. Mr. Faulkner succeeded in not having his novel fall apart by making the center that of which was not included in the text, and thus a perpetual source of surprise for literary scholars to come. Well, actually, so it goes in relationships, so it goes in thought, so it goes in philosophy, so it goes in all things. To hold them in a manner by which they can continue to surprise you. And I think Jesus suggests, there's a funny thing with Jesus, right? The only time I recall Jesus in books coming up is at the end of John, where it is said, and I suppose if all of the things that Jesus taught were written down, the whole world couldn't contain all of the books, right? Because Jesus, before he ascends, goes on. But then oddly, the times I do recall write this down is, say, at the end of the book of Revelation, when God is sitting on the throne and he says, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. I'm making all things new, which is to suggest that what should be written down is this really weird prophecy thing called the book of Revelation that you have no idea what's going on. So when you write something down, it needs to be very odd. And if it's not very odd, you might want to speak it and simply have a biographical story or account of the person doing the speaking, right? So notice that disposition. You are recording in a manner that leaves open mystery, right? And the best of liminality, of the in-between with the hyphen, is always a testament to the mystery. And it is always writing and recording in a manner to drop the pen before the period, per se. It is recording to the point where the edge is seen, and then, as Buber says, I just go to the window and point. So too, one goes to the edge and marvels. And in that marveling, perhaps inspires people to do the same. I will also say that Christian needs to make that liminal board where everything is centralized and people know everything that's going on. Christian, I'm so glad you volunteered for that. That is magnificent. I know a gentleman, Slowco, maybe, had started something like that. I would certainly benefit. We need that local library board with the tax up where things are written. And so, you know, that's what we need, right? So I think it's a beautiful idea. The last thing I will say, and then give it to Jacob and Dimitri, is indeed the net has a design of a certain, for me, I don't know who's coming. I do not know the topic. I do not know how the people who come will interact with one another. It basically forces me to take the plunge. It actually is there's supposed to be a kind of courage element, right? Because you come up, it's time to speak. And the more and more you get into the habit of doing that, the more you actually trust yourself, you trust other people, and you also trust what is possible, even though it is not predicted. There are other conversational formats like the anti-debate or what Christian was saying that will train human beings in other habits that will make them prepared for other conversational situations. Say with a politician who thinks they're stupid, or with a local person that never does philosophy, or with someone in business who thinks there's no money in it. One will be able, thanks to the liminal web, to have different spaces that go into with different rule sets of how the conversation is done that will habituate them to different capacities for different relational contexts. And that will be very powerful because we have not had, that sort of dojo, if you will, for conversational skills for different situations that have been given to people in their immediacy on their laptop. If you maybe were around a university, you could get lucky, but how many universities taught that? They were too busy just, say, teaching the subject material, right? Well, YouTube allows you to get world-class lectures on take your pick when you can, as you do the laundry. And it also allows there to be the creation of different spaces for different conversational technologies that will habituate people to different capacities, that will make them prepared for different encounters with different people, of whom having those skills in great variety will prove advantageous because you never know how the person is going to talk before they open their mouth. And so having those different skills will be very advantageous. At the net, I'm not very good at the insulting, but hey, I'll try to make the net. The lo-fi beat, I can't believe the sound is working. It really is atrocious that we haven't done it before, but now, hey, the music is galore. You're playing music. I like that recent track. You dropped it. It was hot. I had the going back and forth going with the repeat, the breathing of the infinity. It really made me free. And Dimitri, you're free to come in, no pressure, but we've implied it on record. And so if you bring it, it would be really great. I would appreciate it. But hey, you're great because your tracks are hot. I hope everyone listens because they hit the spot of where you need to listen and find and hear one another, because that's why we're here, to hear one another. We go through life and we're thinking we hear, but really we're just listening. Guy is always saying that we tend to hear but not listen, so we're trying, but that requires to catch up the threads, to thread them right, to make a rug of everything that's said so we can walk across on this confusing world, fragments breaking everywhere, but we hold it together. The tone is breaking. But there it is. It came right back. When you thought that you lost it, you're caught. Like the conversations are best when you're caught in the hands and you're folded with friends. Like one you all here. We're here with you. And you see, every Thursday we gather together to try to replicate time together, Mr. Dillard, in the beat. Big T. Russberg. When I was, I guess, 8. Eating. I had a lot of sausage and now not so much because I'm allergic, and I hope what I'm saying is not something to which you're allergic like I am beef, because got the tick bite. Small little bite. Made a big difference, but you see, we're trying. That's what we're doing here.